The year was 1939. The world was on the brink of a monumental shift, a shift that would alter the course of history forever. The world watched with bated breath as news of escalating tensions spread like wildfire. Radios crackled with updates and newspapers flew off the stands, each headline more alarming than the last. A storm was brewing, one that would soon engulf the planet in the deadliest conflict in human history. The ominous clouds of war gathered, casting a shadow over nations and their people. This was World War II, a global war of unprecedented scale and devastation. It was a conflict that would touch every corner of the globe, leaving no nation untouched by its fury. It raged from the bustling cities of Europe to the remote islands of the Pacific. The war's reach was vast, its impact felt in both urban centers and isolated outposts. Millions of soldiers and civilians were caught in its grip. The front lines were everywhere, and the distinction between combatant and civilian blurred as the war dragged on. From the ashes of this conflict, a new world order emerged. Nations sought to rebuild, to find a way to ensure that such a catastrophe would never happen again. The war left an indelible mark on human history, shaping the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. Borders were redrawn, alliances were forged, and the world as we knew it was forever changed. The sheer scale of the conflict was staggering. It was a war that involved more than just armies. It was a total war that mobilized entire societies. Over 30 countries were eventually drawn into the war, with millions of soldiers mobilized. Men and women from all walks of life answered the call to serve, leaving their homes and families behind. The conflict spanned multiple continents, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Cities were reduced to rubble, and landscapes were scarred by the relentless fighting. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Southeast Asia, battles raged on land, at sea, and in the air. Each theater of war presented its own unique challenges and horrors. Technological advancements like the atomic bomb added a terrifying new dimension to warfare. The destructive power of these new weapons was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The world had never seen such destructive power before. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the war to a devastating conclusion, but at an unimaginable human cost. The human cost of the war was immeasurable. The loss of life was staggering, and the physical and emotional scars would last a lifetime. Millions perished, both soldiers and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Entire communities were uprooted, and the fabric of society was torn apart. The war left countless families shattered and displaced. Refugee camps swelled with those who had lost everything, and the mourning for the dead was a universal sorrow. The horrors of the Holocaust, a systematic genocide perpetrated by Nazi Germany, shocked the world. The scale of the atrocities committed was almost beyond comprehension. The systematic extermination of Jews, Roma, LGBTQ+ individuals, and other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime stands as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty. The Holocaust remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. The war also had profound cultural and social impacts. It changed the way people lived, worked, and thought about their roles in society. Women who had taken on traditionally male roles on the home front challenged gender norms. They worked in factories, served in auxiliary military roles, and proved that they were capable of much more than society had previously allowed. The war effort spurred technological advancements in fields like medicine and aviation. Innovations developed during the war would go on to have lasting impacts in peacetime. The war's end ushered in a new era of international cooperation, with the formation of the United Nations. This new organization aimed to foster peace and prevent future conflicts on such a devastating scale. The world, forever changed by the conflict, sought to rebuild and prevent such horrors from ever happening again. Nations came together to rebuild shattered economies, to heal the wounds of war, and to create a more just and peaceful world for future generations. The seeds of World War II were sown long before the first shots were fired. The aftermath of World War I left Europe in a state of disarray, with nations grappling to rebuild and recover from the devastation. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919 after World War I, aimed to ensure peace. The treaty was intended to be a comprehensive solution to prevent future conflicts, with the Allied powers imposing strict terms on the defeated Central Powers. However, it instead bred resentment and instability. The harsh terms of the treaty were seen as punitive rather than conciliatory, leading to widespread dissatisfaction. Germany, blamed for the war, was forced to accept harsh penalties. The infamous war guilt clause placed full responsibility for the conflict on Germany, a burden that many Germans found deeply unjust. These included territorial losses, crippling reparations payments, and severe limitations on its military. The economic strain of reparations payments crippled the German economy, leading to hyperinflation and widespread poverty. The treaty sowed the seeds of anger and humiliation among the German populace. Many Germans felt betrayed by their own government for agreeing to such terms, and this sense of betrayal festered over the years. In the aftermath of the war, Europe was in turmoil. The continent was marked by political upheaval, economic hardship, and social unrest, creating a fertile ground for radical ideologies. Economic depression gripped many nations. Political instability was rampant. The Great Depression of the late 1920s and early 1930s exacerbated these issues, leading to mass unemployment and further discontent. This volatile environment provided fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. People, desperate for solutions, turned to radical leaders who promised quick fixes and strong leadership. Totalitarian regimes promising order and strength rose to power in Germany, Italy, and Japan. These regimes capitalized on the chaos and uncertainty of the times, presenting themselves as the only viable alternative to the failing democratic governments. These regimes, led by charismatic but ruthless dictators, exploited nationalistic sentiments and economic hardship to consolidate their power. They used propaganda and mass rallies to galvanize support and suppress opposition. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party capitalized on the widespread discontent. Hitler's message of national rejuvenation and revenge against the perceived injustices of the Treaty of Versailles resonated deeply with many Germans. Hitler, a powerful orator, tapped into the feelings of humiliation and resentment left by the Treaty of Versailles. His speeches were filled with promises to restore Germany's pride and power, making him a beacon of hope for many. He promised to restore Germany to its former glory, scapegoating Jews and other minorities for the nation's problems. This scapegoating was a central part of Nazi ideology, which sought to unite the German people against common enemies. The Nazis' ideology, based on racial purity and German dominance, found a receptive audience in a nation desperate for change. The promise of a pure and powerful Germany appealed to those who felt marginalized and powerless. Meanwhile, in Italy, Benito Mussolini had already established a fascist regime. Mussolini's rise to power predated Hitler's, and he served as a model for other totalitarian leaders. Mussolini, like Hitler, promised to restore Italy to its former glory. He used the rhetoric of nationalism and militarism to rally support, presenting himself as the savior of the Italian nation. He emphasized aggressive nationalism and imperial expansion. Mussolini's ambitions included the creation of a new Roman Empire, and he pursued these goals through military conquest and colonization. Japan, under the increasingly militaristic control of Emperor Hirohito, sought to expand its influence in Asia. The Japanese government, dominated by military leaders, pursued a policy of aggressive expansionism. Driven by a belief in its own racial superiority, Japan aimed to establish dominance over East Asia and the Pacific. This belief in racial superiority justified their brutal treatment of conquered peoples and their relentless pursuit of territorial expansion. These totalitarian regimes, each driven by their own ambitions and ideologies, posed a growing threat to world peace. Their aggressive policies and disregard for international norms created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Their expansionist ambitions and disregard for international law set the stage for another global conflict. The League of Nations, established to maintain peace, proved ineffective in curbing their aggression. The world watched nervously as these regimes armed themselves and made their intentions clear. The military buildup in Germany, Italy, and Japan was a clear signal that these nations were preparing for war. The question was not if, but when, the next war would begin. The stage was set for a conflict that would engulf the world once again, as the lessons of World War I were ignored and the mistakes of the past repeated. The uneasy peace that had settled over Europe after World War I was shattered in the early hours of September 1, 1939. The Treaty of Versailles, which had ended the Great War, left many unresolved tensions and grievances, particularly in Germany. The economic hardships and national humiliation experienced by the German people created fertile ground for the rise of Adolf Hitler and his aggressive expansionist policies. The German Wehrmacht, under Hitler's orders, launched a surprise attack on Poland. This invasion was meticulously planned and executed with ruthless efficiency. The German military machine, well prepared and highly motivated, moved with a speed and coordination that took the world by surprise. This act of aggression marked the beginning of World War II. The invasion was not just a military operation but a clear signal of Germany's intentions to dominate Europe. The world watched in shock as the events unfolded, realizing that the fragile peace was over. The invasion of Poland was swift and brutal, a terrifying display of Germany's military might. Cities were bombed and civilians were caught in the crossfire. The German forces showed no mercy, and the Polish people suffered immensely. Hitler's forces, employing their infamous Blitzkrieg tactics, quickly overwhelmed the Polish defenses. Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, was a new form of warfare that emphasized speed and surprise. It involved coordinated attacks by tanks, infantry, and aircraft, designed to break through enemy lines and encircle them. The Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war in German, combined rapid armored advances with close air support to devastating effect. The Polish military, despite their bravery and determination, were unable to withstand the onslaught. The German forces moved with such speed that the Polish command structure was quickly overwhelmed. Polish forces, though bravely resisting, were simply outmatched. Their equipment and tactics were outdated compared to the modern mechanized German army. Despite their valiant efforts, the Polish soldiers were unable to hold back the tide of the German advance. The speed and ferocity of the German attack left the world stunned. News of the invasion spread quickly, and the international community reacted with a mix of shock, fear, and outrage. The destruction in Poland was immense, and the human cost was staggering. On September 3, 1939, after Germany ignored ultimatums to cease hostilities, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany. This was a momentous decision, marking the official start of the conflict that would engulf the world. The declarations of war were met with a mix of resolve and apprehension by the British and French people. The British Empire, with its vast colonial holdings, was also drawn into the conflict. The die was cast. The global nature of the British Empire meant that the war would soon spread to other parts of the world, involving millions of people from different continents. Europe was once again embroiled in a major war. The memories of the Great War were still fresh in the minds of many, and the prospect of another devastating conflict was a grim reality. The political and military leaders of Europe faced difficult decisions as they prepared for the long and arduous struggle ahead. The declaration of war marked a turning point in history. It signaled the end of appeasement and the beginning of a determined effort to stop Hitler's aggression. The leaders of Britain and France knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, but they were resolved to stand firm. What had begun as a regional conflict in Europe quickly escalated into a global war. The alliances and rivalries that had been building for years came into play, drawing more and more countries into the conflict. The war would soon spread to Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, affecting millions of lives. The alliances forged in the years leading up to the war came into play. Countries that had been preparing for this moment now found themselves thrust into the fray. The complex web of alliances and treaties meant that the conflict would be far-reaching and multifaceted. The world watched in horror as the forces of the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, clashed with those of the Allied powers, led by Great Britain, France, and later the United States and the Soviet Union. The stakes were incredibly high, and the outcome of the war would shape the future of the world for generations to come. The fate of the world hung in the balance. The decisions made by the leaders of the time would have profound and lasting consequences. The war would test the limits of human endurance and ingenuity, and its impact would be felt long after the final shots were fired.